Hi, I'm Richard Lang. Welcome to AEROPS. Today we're going to talk with Ruben Uriarte, who's a good friend of mine for many years. Ruben's going to talk about his book, The Coyame Incident, which is an incredible story of a mid-air collision between a small airplane and a UFO on the U.S. Mexican border near the town of Presidio, Texas. Ruben graduated with a bachelor's degree in psychology and Latin American studies. Ruben is a MUFON field investigator. He's currently the state director for Northern California and the national director for MUFON in Mexico and Canada. He served on many international UFO-related projects as a translator. Ruben currently serves as a board member for Opus, which is an organization for paranormal and support and understanding. He's authored several books to include Mexico's Roswell, The Other Roswell, Aliens in the Forest, The Coyame Incident, and Falling Angels. You can find his book on Amazon with the link that's provided on the screen. Aerospace Research Operations is an organization that's domiciled in Virginia and registered with the State Corporation Commission. Also known by the acronym AEROPS, which is a scientific research cooperative that's focused on unidentified anomalous phenomena and the associated high strangeness and paranormal effects that typically result after an encounter. Hey, Ruben, it's good to see you and talk to you again. It's been a while. The last time that we really worked together was back during the Bass MUFON SIP project when we were part of the OSAP program. And as I remember, you were one of the investigators that was on that team, and we really that was a really cool program and a really good project. But
Oh, definitely, definitely.
yeah,
Thank
well,
you
I
for
just wanted to
inviting me.
welcome you and tell you I'm really glad to have you on here, and I think our listeners will really enjoy what you have to say.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, that it was a very interesting experience being involved in the that MUFON
Yeah.
program and in dealing with the bass, and I learned a lot from that experience. I also, with that, been working on a number of other research teams, and I was very fortunate to get together with a friend of mine. He's a researcher named Noe Torres, and we started focusing on UFO related cases along the southwest border between Mexico and the United States.
Yeah.
And so it's been a very interesting journey. So we've written several books.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry about that.
Yeah, both Noe and I had put our attention on the cases that have been occurring, those being primarily crash retrievals.
Right,
And
right.
that really was amazing to find out the different events that have happened along the Texas-Mexican border.
Um, Hold on a minute. Something got screwed up here. I don't know what's going on. Uh, there we go. Okay, we're back.
All right.
So one of the things that I noticed when I was looking at the book, and originally the title of the book was like the Mexican Roswell, and then it looks like you guys have done two or three iterations or revisions on that book. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes. We have some additional information. We would add it. And then the last edition called the Coyame incident, we actually were able to put in testimony from some eyewitnesses. Really
Wow.
very interesting information that was given to us by the eyewitnesses. The so that opened our eyes that something definitely happened. Now, whether or not there was an actual crash retrieval operation that was going on, we had to do a lot of detective work, and as a result of that, Richard, we had to rely on our connections with other Mexican investigators. Because during that time, Mexico was, and it still is, going through a drug war with the
Oh,
cartels, and that
yeah.
really
And you don't
limited.
want to get in the middle of that, right?
Yeah, crossing the border and then going and traveling, which we did. And we went into the interview people, and we went way out there in the ranches, we were kind of naive at first, but we didn't know all this was happening. And it wasn't until we did a show with the UFO Hunters with Bill Burns
Hmm.
and his
I
team.
remember.
And we did go and travel to Mexico, and then we saw all these military patrols, guys on Jeep, on these Humvees, and with these big, large machine guns going up and down the road. And sometimes we would stop and ask why. What were we doing there in that part of the desert? Yeah, it's some extraordinary experiences happen, but as I mentioned, we kept getting additional information, so we updated our books, and it's
So
still, we haven't closed the case on it. I mean, there's
I
still
hear you.
other
So
things.
could you maybe just give the listeners a kind of a summary of what actually happened there? I mean, it's really an incredible story, but tell me what happened.
Yeah, in general, the I want to say the source of the information came from a military document that was sent anonymously to several researchers back in the early 1990s.
Hmm.
And with that, this report was known what was called the Deneb report. And there's a story behind that later. I'll share with you. But in the document, it stated that there was a UFO or an object that was traveling around 2,000 miles per hour. Was first, so it was up to around 75,000 feet and began descending in steps. And in the report, I was saying that this object was being tracked by Air Force and military radar, and they were concerned that this might be a missile being launched either somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico or from Cuba or somewhere nearby. And the concern was that perhaps this might be a meteor, but this thing was descending in steps, not like an arc, like a meteor. So if it was flying toward Texas, and then it made a 90-degree turn and then flew into Mexican airspace, which was interesting that it avoided that. And so as this object was traveling, there was a small plane that left out of El Paso, and this plane was going toward Mexico City.
Was it like a small, like a Cessna or something?
Something like a Cessna, correct?
Okay.
And the plane was heading southeast, and then all of a sudden there was an explosion, and they both objects collided into each other. Now, as I mentioned, that this object was being tracked by U.S. military radar, and so the next day there was a Mexican army patrol that went out to search the desert area, and they were just
Was this
expecting
like a remote area though, where there weren't any houses?
very
Okay.
exactly. It's
Yeah.
very isolated. To kind of give you an idea, um, in the map in our book, we say UFO crash near Presidio, Texas, and across the border, it's approximately about 40 miles where we
Hmm.
thought that or explored for the possibility of the crash site. So the Mexican retrieval team went and found the plane, and then they found this object, this round saucer-shaped object. It was approximately 16 feet in diameter, about 5 feet in height. It was somewhat small, and it had apparently there were two jagged holes in there. The
You mean on
report,
it where it would collided?
yes, really there was a
Damage. Yeah.
indentation where possibility where it happened. And so, as I mentioned, that it was a small saucer, and the Mexican Army patrol also had a flatbed truck, and so they were hoisting the object onto the flatbed truck. And in the meantime, they were being the Mexican team was being monitored by reconnaissance aircraft,
Now, let
American
me ask you a
reconnaissance.
question. So this thing crashed in the desert, and the airplane that it hit, it all they both crashed in the desert.
Exactly.
They in close proximity to each other, or um, were they in the same location, or were they
Right.
spread
When
out?
they found the plane, there was the craft or the airplane was supposedly obliterated,
Oh,
but the wreckage, they were able to pick up the wreckage, and that's when they discovered the saucer.
gotcha.
And there's something very unique about that size, because I want to go back to that about
I mean,
it being 16 feet in diameter and 5 feet in height. Because there was another incident that happened 8 months later near Mexico City. But anyway, going back to to the accident, the troops arrived. They loaded up the the disc, and they were about to disembark. And we think they were going to go back to Okinaga, which is a border town next to Presidio, Texas. There's a military base there. Also, there's Army military base, Mexican Army military base in near Chihuahua City, which is the capital of Chihuahua, and that was approximately probably about an hour's drive from the site. Well, what happened was the convoy was ready to go, and then within minutes it stopped, and the that caught the attention of the reconnaissance spy satellites as well as the planes, and then they observed a number of bodies laying on the ground.
But now, when you say bodies, are you talking about the crash victims, or are you talking about the guys that recovered?
Thank you for the clarification. Yes, it was the Mexican soldiers.
So if I got this right, they loaded this thing on some kind of flatbed truck, and they start to proceed to evacuate the area. And then in the meantime, the surveillance satellites are seeing that there's a bunch of guys laying there dead. Or
Yeah, they were laying on the ground, and that really caught the attention.
wow.
So, so obviously something happened, and that put an alert. And apparently there was a crash retrieval team that was stationed in Fort Bliss, Texas, and that that
They
is
no
a
doubt were on the way down there, probably. Yeah.
yeah. They they were really on standby. It was as if this team was already alerted, and obviously they knew what they were doing because there was a Sea Stallion helicopter. It's a big, large helicopter that, and then four Hueys that
Wow.
left the army base out of Fort Bliss and flew into Mexican airspace toward the direction where the crash site had occurred. So what was interesting in the report, it also stated that the U.S. Retrieval team, these soldiers were all wearing protective suits, like hazmat
Hazmat
suits.
stuff, right?
You know, so when they flew into and when they arrived toward the crash site, they saw the bodies and
And did you say that they really didn't, they were pretty close to the crash site. They didn't really get to drive very far away, did they?
right, yeah.
Okay, okay.
Um, Yeah, the Texas border in Presidio, like I mentioned, was about 40 miles from Presidio from the
Hmm,
border. And then if you add on another hour or so of flight time from El Paso, that's where Fort Bliss is at.
got
So
it.
these guys were able to fly right into Mexican airspace. So as they were arriving, they saw the bodies and they quickly were able to get on the flatbed truck and they hooked it up to the large Sea Stallion, a
That's a
helicopter.
helicopter.
Yes, they use that primarily. You may have seen that. They primarily Navy and Marines use that helicopter, but it was used extensively during Vietnam to retrieve down fighter pilots that were shot down,
Yeah.
and they usually sent in because they're long range, but they were being escorted by these Hueys. So as they arrived, they noticed the bodies, and then they started to unhitch the saucer, and they hooked it up by cables up to the sea stallion, and then immediately the sea stallion picked up the saucer. I think they estimated it to be around 1,500 pounds. It was somewhat light. Um,
And it
so
was
they
only what, how many feet? 14 feet or something?
about 16 feet in diameter and
And it
5 feet
weighed
in height.
1,400 pounds?
1,500 was the
That's about
approximate.
maybe a car. Yeah, that wouldn't be too bad.
Yeah, but yeah, exactly about the size of a car. So this retrieval team, as they started to take the saucer away, then the rest of the soldiers start picking up the dead bodies,
Mm.
and and they gathered the debris, and they went, and in the report they described that the whole area was basically quarantined, or it was they destroyed what was there with high explosives.
So they were thinking that maybe those guys, some kind of chemical or bacteriological agent got them, or
Ex-
radiation or something that killed them. And there was
yes,
contamination.
exactly,
Gotcha.
exactly. That was the thinking was, why would they have done that? Why didn't they take any of the bodies back to have it analyzed? And obviously, they were concerned that this might have been a biological
Exactly.
incident, or radiation. And the soldiers, of course, the American soldiers were in protective suits. And so, and unlike the Mexican soldiers, they weren't prepared for anything. They went ahead and retrieved. They were trying to retrieve the craft, but obviously something got them. They were exposed to something, which is interesting because I'll get into that explosion in a little bit. But
That's
going
what I was
back,
going to ask you. So if I have this right, the recon team took the saucer, hooked it up to a helicopter, and took it away. And
exactly.
then the rest of it, you had the plane crash and the trailer and the dead soldiers, and they basically piled them up and then used some kind of super hot explosive to basically
Yeah.
dispose of them.
That was, which, yeah, I'll just go right into that because it led to some speculation. Why would they have destroy the
Yeah,
evidence? Why they didn't take anything?
that's what I was
And
wondering.
so then Noe did some research, and we started to look into the possibility that there was a small, what's called a suitcase nuke, that was developed back in the 60s,
Mm-hmm.
been used in our arsenal back until the 80s. I think we probably have them, but the device is known as an MK-54 special atomic demolition munition, and it basically puts out a low yield radiation, but it's also very easy to transport.
And it puts when it goes off, it incinerates it. It's hot as the sun, so it's going to incinerate anything that's there. Yeah.
And that's why it's equivalent to 10 tons of TNT. And it's a very lethal, effective way of cleansing an area that's perhaps been contaminated by some sort of biological agent.
No kidding.
And again, it was the concept. Again, it was the nuclear blast would neutralize any biological agent, and so it was also, you could find more research about this type of weapon. If you go to the Department of Energy, they actually wrote up what's called a radiation neutralization of stored biological warfare agents with low yield nuclear warheads. Very lengthy title, but yeah, you
Yep.
could do some research on that.
Well, I was going to ask you, you guys later went actually back to that location, did you not?
Yes, we did.
Was it radioactive?
Well, here's the deal with that. It was very interesting, Richard. As I mentioned, um, we did our preliminary scouting of that area,
You mean
and
like using a meter, make sure you didn't get contaminated and stuff
yeah,
like that? Yeah, okay.
we before we did that, we had, like I mentioned, we had gone and interviewed people at some small local ranches within that area,
Yeah.
and then we were told about a pit, and where supposedly things were buried down in this pit. And so we
You
made
mean
a note.
after the nuclear thing and they incinerated everything, they probably buried what was left.
Exactly.
Got
Yeah.
it. That's
So
interesting.
yeah, it gets really interesting with that. So we were shown this pit, and we noticed that there was no vegetation or anything around that area. So later we came back with the UFO hunters, Bill Burns. They were
Yep.
doing a documentary on crash retrievals, and
Right.
one was an incident that happened in another part of Mexico, and then of course the Coyame
Yeah, I
crash.
know Bill Burns. I know
Yeah.
him. Yeah.
So with that, um, they had a gentleman who brought his Geiger counter,
Hmm.
and we went to the pit, and he was able to put his device down into
Hmm.
a hole, and all of a sudden it started spiking.
Oh, so there was radiation down there.
There
Okay.
was something there, and
Yeah.
he didn't want to. Of course, he said, well, "I don't want to mess with this area because we're not protected. We don't know
Really.
what we're dealing with." So we made a note of that and of that discovery that yeah, this may be a potential location. So what was also interesting was that we when Noe and I had first gone out with another friend, we had another researcher with us.
Yep.
Um, we found this plane. We found a wreckage of a plane, small plane, and the locals there were telling us that the plane probably belonged to a drug smuggler. And what I found was interesting, Richard, was like I never been to a crash site before,
Mhm.
but I thought this could be very valuable in learning about finding a plane wreckage out in the desert. And
This
you
wasn't
know,
the same airplane though. Is the
no,
Okay, okay.
we at first we thought of, but when the locals were telling us about that it could be a drug smuggler that flew that plane. Well, that kind of made sense to us, but on the other hand, finding an airplane out there in the desert is quite unusual, right?
What was
Yes.
it? Was it like hard landing or did it like dive in and crash impact?
It that's a good question. It looked like it struck something because the material was of the plane wreckage was scattered.
Okay.
A lot of broken, a lot of was a lot of the skin of the plane was had melted, and
You think it
but
caught on fire?
it caught on fire.
Okay.
And then the other thing about it was the plane still had lots of chunks of aluminum to it.
Do you think they were did they recover the humans or the biologicals in there? There weren't any bodies in it.
No, no, there was no bodies
Okay.
yet. So I mean, it pretty much we didn't suspect, we didn't think that was the exact plane, but the
Gotcha.
fact that the fact that it was out there in the desert and it kind of gave us an idea what to look for. And what I found was really interesting was that the locals, the people that were showing us the
Yeah.
plane wreckage, they started to strip the plane
And what
of
again?
all the aluminum.
Oh, I'm sure,
They,
yeah.
they
Salvage.
started, yeah, salvage, yeah. And I thought, holy cow! I said, if this was an actual, the real deal, I mean, we would lose our evidence right there because these folks they were collecting it and you know um, collecting all the all as much aluminum as possible to
Well, in
recycle.
that other crash, taking souvenirs might be a little
Exactly.
fatal as far as if they were still radioactive, you know.
So as the story goes, the helicopters flew back across the border.
Hmm.
There's another little town called Candelaria,
Okay.
and supposedly the helicopters took flew over that area, and then he flew into a mountain range called the Davis Mountains.
Okay.
and that's where they brought into hell the saucer, and then it was met with another convoy, and so they loaded the saucer on another truck,
Flatbed or something.
U.S. Army, yes, a
Yeah.
flatbed
Huh.
truck or whatever, and then they left. Now, supposedly, this saucer was either loaded on a train later or just driven. It was covered with a large canvas, and
Sure.
then that supposedly they took the craft either to
Wright Patterson.
Wright Patterson, thank you, yes, Wright Patterson Air Force Base, or they
That's all the
also
way up in
mentioned,
Ohio. So they had a nice little
yeah,
trip for that, right?
and they said, and or they were also thinking of taking it to Atlanta, Georgia.
Mm.
And so there's a large military base there, but we were speculating why Atlanta, Georgia is, and we found out that the um, center of disease control is based out of Atlanta, Georgia. Now, whether there's a connection there or what, but we began speculating. So here we are. We've got as we continue our research, yeah, as I mentioned, we were able to gather more information as far as the incident had happened, which led to our third book, the Coyame incident. And in that, as I
That's
mentioned,
what I was going to say. What was the difference? What did you learn?
yeah, what we found was we found witnesses. We had people
Wow.
on the U.S. side, a teacher and her son. Her son was only about 10 years old. And this, again, the incident happened in 1974, so he was about 10 years old at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And they both remember seeing a large explosion coming from behind, and it mushroom up behind some mountains on
So they
Mexico.
must have witnessed the detonation.
Yeah, they didn't know. Yeah, that's what we
And you
determined.
say they described it as a mushroom,
Yes,
then that probably would indicate it likely was a nuclear thing. Yeah.
and then what was interesting was that the young man remembers seeing a group of helicopters flying over that area where he lived, and I mentioned a little town or it's a little village called Candelaria,
Yeah.
and that's where they saw these helicopters flying back. So we noted that in our book, and then the most extraordinary case. This gets more bizarre, Richard, because I
Sounds
think
good.
all these cases have like it's a piece of the puzzle. You
Right.
deal with one case, and
Yeah,
there
of
is a
course.
connection with another case, and so there was a witness that heard me talk on George Norrie,
Yep.
and he called in. He was trying to get in touch with me, and then George had me back on his show, and then he was able. This person was able to get in, and he said, "Hey, back in 1974, um, he and his family, he went with his parents, went to go to Coyame, and
Hmm.
he had uncles and he had
Right.
aunts, and he had his family there, and they would periodically travel to Coyame to visit
Hmm.
relatives. And the gentleman was also a police officer.
Okay.
He was with the LAPD for a long
Hmm.
time, and very experienced, very very credible. And he started sharing his experience, and he mentioned that one day when he was there in Coyame at his grandfather's ranch, that his grandfather allowed this gentleman to Tony, that was his name, Tony Ramirez. He allowed Tony to ride on one of his horses. The grandfather said, "Here, take it, and enjoy your day."
Now, is this ranch fairly close to where the crash was?
Um, not really. It's about maybe I would estimate about 20, 30 miles
Okay,
where
okay,
we thought where the crash is was at. But
right.
this is what gets really
So what
bizarre.
happens when he gets on the horse? That's where you were telling.
Okay, so he's riding his horse, and then it was getting late, and so he decided to get off and then start grooming the horse,
Hmm.
get it back into the stall, and then he notices a small what he thought looked like a dog coming toward him. Across the road was this cornfield. So he's looking and he notices that, hey, this thing is not a dog. And he's looking at it and he noticed that this thing had a large head and that the head it was large that it had a small neck, but it looked like this thing was having difficulty in balancing the head, the weight of the head. And he looked and he said that the eyes were red and that the ridge of the forehead were ridges, almost like a small little protrudements on the head. And that scared the hell out of him. And he ran and he ran into the house and he started crying. And his grandparents said, "What's going on? Why are you so disturbed?" And to calm him down, his grandmother, this is an old remedy, but when you're having a serious attack or panic attack, one of the old remedies is just getting a glass of water and mixing it with sugar. So his grandmother gave it to Tony, and Tony started drinking the
Hmm.
liquid, and that calmed him a little bit. So he told his grandparents and his uncle that was there too what this creature looked like, and then his grandmother said, "Oh, you saw the diablitos, you saw the little devils." So apparently his grandparents had seen these creatures before, and
I
the fact
remember
that they
back
called
in
them
the day, a long time ago, there was talk about in Mexico where these little, some kind of weird creatures like you were talking about, people were seeing them. They called them a different name though. But yeah, I've heard that kind of stuff.
so what's interesting with that description of the being, let's see if I can grab it real quickly. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Um, I don't know if you can see this book. Can you see it?
No, you can't because of the
Okay. Yeah,
the
okay,
virtual
with
background.
distortion. Well, back in 1996, there was a UFO crash that occurred near Varginha, Brazil, where there were these two beings that were retrieved by the Brazilian military, and one of them was still alive. And the same description. Tony said he was seeing this program on television, and he saw the creature. He saw the creature, and he said, "That's exactly what I saw in Coyame. That's exactly what I saw." So with that, we were able to talked to Tony, and we interviewed him, and so we put his testimony into our book, and then so we had that. And another other interesting connection, Richard, as I mentioned, this incident occurred in 1974,
All right.
August August 25th, 1974. Approximately about 8 months later, in May May 8th, I believe, of 1975, there was this incident that happened where there was a pilot flying like a Piper Cub or
Mhm.
small plane,
Right.
and he um, he started flying back. He flew some businessmen down in Acapulco, and then on his way back to Mexico City, he felt like he was being watched. When he turned to his left, he saw this disc-like object flying
Oh.
right above his wing. And the object was around 15, 14 to 15 feet in diameter. That's what he estimates. And this thing was just flying just several inches above the wing. And he still felt like he was being watched. He turned to his right and saw another object hovering right above the right side of the plane. So both wings were being were we had two UFOs right above it. And then all of a sudden, as he's flying forward, he another object came, and it came in low, head on, and then it diverted and went underneath the fuselage, and it bumped. It hit the plane.
Uh-oh.
So the
Did,
guy,
was he able to get it down the ground safely or?
oh, he had no control of the plane. None of his flight controls were working, and so he immediately got on his radio and started calling Mayday, Mayday, Mayday
Right.
to the air traffic controllers in Mexico City. And he told them that he had three unidentified objects surrounding his airplane, and he had no control. And what was interesting was that these objects were taking the plane up higher, and his cockpit was not pressurized. You know? So his concern was he was going to suffocate from lack of air.
Right. Anything in 12,000, 14,000 feet, you're probably going to start passing. You'll pass
Yeah,
out pretty soon.
and that's exactly around approximately was the altitude. So he began praying, and then all of a sudden, one disc would raise up higher from the wing and fly away from the airplane. Then the other two planes flew. The other two saucers followed the other one, and they were flying in formation, and they were flying toward the direction of the volcano Mount Popocatépetl, which is the very huge volcano near Mexico City.
Was
And
he
he
able
was
to
all
get control of the plane back then?
well. He was able to fly back to the airport, but he wasn't able to. But he had problems with the landing gear, and he figured that that was probably because of the bump that he had received. Uh,
So it actually made contact and hit him.
Made contact with
Okay.
the plane. Yeah, so he had to lower the landing gear manually.
Yeah,
He
there's a
was able to get
hydraulic crank in there, right?
he was able to get it down, and then he was able to return and fly back and landed. And there was this incident was really covered in the media. They thought that there was something wrong with him, but he had an examination, and I had a chance to meet with him in person.
Well, the plane had to be banged up somewhere that you could see
Yes, and
probably hit it. Okay.
they took pictures of that, and but that connection with the saucer in Coyame that I mentioned that was around 16 feet in diameter and about 5 feet in height. And then here we have another incident that happened 8 months later.
Was it the same type of craft, do you think?
I his description or his drawing was a little bit different, I would say. Well, we just based it on the information. Well, the information on the saucer in Coyame, we just took it based on the what was provided in that report. Whereas the other case that happened near Mexico City, um, there you had the actual witness, and he was able to draw out the objects. But so the other difference, like I mentioned before, in our case in Coyame, we had eyewitness testimony, and then we had this remarkable story that was shared to us by a
So
former
somebody
police
else
officer.
had an encounter in the same. Going back to that whole thing with the crash site. So there was about how many Mexican soldiers were there involved in that?
Well, we estimate it could have been up to up to 24, possibly, because there were
Whoa.
several vehicles.
Well, I wonder, you got to wonder like 24 guys just disappear. I mean, their families would be looking for them and stuff. There had to be, I mean, Mexican government had probably had some serious damage control to deal with that, to
Yes, and this is
25
what
guys go out and don't come back. That's not cool.
that's not cool, and it gets even more stranger,
Like how?
Richard. Um, well, because we were able to travel too much into the interior of Mexico because of the cartel situation. They were warning people not to travel there. So as I mentioned, we had to rely on the, the research from our Mexican investigator friends. And what was interesting was that apparently the military base commander from Ojinaga, which is the
Mhm.
border town,
Is that
uh,
probably where they were deployed from?
yes,
Okay.
for the Mexican, the gentleman was let go. They changed base commanders. Then,
You mean after that happened, he got fired, you
yeah,
think?
yeah,
Wow.
there were three of them. And then, I'm sorry, it was like, yeah, 3 days later, they changed
Wow.
commanders. And it gets even more interesting. Apparently, as far as newspaper articles, there was one of the researchers had difficulty finding the newspapers around that time period, but he did find something. And what he said was there was supposedly a group of Mexican soldiers that were killed in a truck accident. How mysterious.
That's how they explained it away.
Yeah.
But
And then
still,
it
a truck
gets
accident, you'd have bodies to send home to the families. You know what I'm saying?
and yeah, in fact, it gets, as I say, it gets even more stranger. Apparently, um, when President Ford, this happened right around when he was elected, he actually flew down to talk with the president of Mexico, and this was 2 months later, and people were really wondering what the heck, why were they, what was the speculation? So possibly, just possibly, the Coyame incident might have been brought up because I guess what was really important that they were trying to prevent a possible um, a possible crisis. They're trying to divert any sort of security crisis from happening, especially with another country.
Yeah, right. Ruben, we were kind of talking offline the other day, and there was sort of some kind of a hint that maybe, the guys, the Mexican guys that died, that there might have been some kind of an incursion that occurred that might have a different ending than where the story goes. What do you think about that?
Well, that's a very controversial situation there, Richard. As I mentioned, maybe we didn't want to create an international incident
Right,
between Mexico and that, but the Mexican government has always worked very closely with American military on crash retrievals in
right.
Mexico and or down missiles. So there's been a relationship over the years. But what was interesting, remember I mentioned that somebody had written down the names of the Mexican
Right.
soldiers,
Yeah, yeah.
and then one of the researchers was looking at death certificates and found the one of the names that might thinks matches the death certificate and mentioned that cause of death was by a bullet. And so that my friend was speculating, well, wait a minute, why? This is interesting. Well, it gets even more
You mean
strange.
that there might have been some kind of confrontation between the two teams or
Yeah.
something?
And this is where it gets really interesting was that when I went to Mexico to speak at a conference, one of
Yep.
the gentlemen there told me that he had spoken with a former military person, a soldier, and that the state of Chihuahua and there's another state called Coahuila, and both Coahuila, and both they're divided into military regions, and the headquarters was in the state of Coahuila. apparently, what I was told, or how he shared it, was that the information the was that the military was contacted by the Pentagon or U.S. military about the downed craft,
Right,
and that they would be sending over a group of helicopters to retrieve the saucer.
right.
So they supposedly they got permission to fly into Mexican airspace. Well, apparently that information was not shared with the soldiers that were from Okinawa that were there at the crash retrieval. They
That's
saw the
probably why the guys
helicopter.
got fired. Right.
So there was military. There was an armed confrontation, and it was supposedly that they were exchanging fire. Finally, the base commanders were able to get through, and they told the soldiers to quit firing at the Americans. So what? So this might again this may be a theory, but it's something that
Well,
even
that would explain why they cleaned them when they cleaned up the bodies, they incinerated everybody. Then there wouldn't be any evidence of bullet. If there was a firefight and guys were getting shot, that would probably disappear in the.
and and this theory it is looked at. I mean, that's one of the I've heard this before.
Yeah, so
Some
we don't know for sure, but it certainly could be one of the
yeah.
options. It's really interesting though. But and I read I didn't read, but I've been told about a case that happened in I think it was in Nevada where there was a triangle craft that crashed. And I haven't had time to do the research on it, but there was a triangle craft that crashed. It was a man-made, alien reproduction vehicle. And I think it was owned and operated by Lockheed Martin. And the same thing happened. The crash occurs. They sent their guys down to clean it up. They weren't communicating. Next thing, the recon team shows up, and then a couple guys get killed. Uh,
Hmm.
so that's probably not the first time that's happened, but it's interesting.
So that with that, and then it gets even more stranger.
Keep going.
Or
I'm with you.
all right. So we had the incident described in Wikipedia. So you would type in Roswell, Mexico, or
Yeah.
crash at Coyame, the information would blur up. Then one day I was looking at it and I said, "That's interesting. There's names to this."
There's what again?
And there were names added
Of
to
who?
the of the Mexican soldiers.
Whoa, that's interesting.
There were like four of the names were mentioned, and that the bodies were recovered, and among these were the Mexican troops.
So now they're
And
saying they recovered some bodies.
yeah,
So but the story goes that they nuked the place, destroyed it.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So what do
But
you think's going
apparently,
on with that?
the names were of the soldiers. I guess the ID process or whatever they this whoever sent this to us provided these names and also provided some of the names of the American soldiers that were added um, to this revised Wikipedia. Somebody wouldn't have put in those names. We thought that maybe someone was pulling our leg. Well, why would someone go ahead and add these names to it?
Well, that's surely not consistent what you originally thought, happened. They took the helicopter, took the saucer, and they basically piled everybody up and nuked them, incinerated them. So
so
how then the chances of
we
bodies coming back would be like not happening.
yeah. As far as yeah, with the Mexican, and then it in this new Wikipedia version, it added names of the American soldiers that were involved in the crash retrieval operation. What's interesting is that this incident, the Coyame, it's approximately now 50 years since this happened, and so the chances are that these people that were involved in the actual retrieval, um, they're maybe in their 70s or 80s, or possibly.
They'd probably be in their
So
80s. Yeah.
and so what we're the long range picture is that maybe, just maybe, Richard, there might be some evidence or reports from the Mexican side of the government that may come up and describe the incident, and we could find some sort of paper trail to it. So we still have it. So I would say our case is still open.
Yeah.
There's still a possibility. In fact, we've had some well-known investigators from Mexico continuing to help us, and we may have some updated information. I know that Jaime Maussan especially was
I mean,
very
yeah.
interested in our case, and he's also at that time they were looking. They're making attempts of making. Hopefully, the Mexican government can become more transparent with cases.
Is
And
Jaime still down there doing that, or did he retire?
oh no, he's very, very active. He
Okay.
has his own television
That's what I
network. And
thought. Yeah. He did.
yeah,
I didn't know if he's still doing it. I remember the day he did.
yes. So
As a matter of
he's
fact, one
with.
of those Star Team cases we did, I didn't go. James Carrion went and met with him and some people down there. One of the ones that we did the UFOs over Earth, the show, we did one with him.
Yours truly was in that.
Oh, were you there?
That was
Okay. Yeah,
fun.
yeah, that's
I went,
right.
I
You
went
were
with
there. Okay.
James.
I remember. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
UFOs over Mexico, and
Yep.
it's the title of the show. So as I mentioned, that these cases are somewhat connected. Or as I mentioned, the gentleman, his name is Carlos de los Santos. That was a pilot that had his encounter with those three disc objects. And so we included that information in our book, the Coyame incident, because we think there's a connection. And then the other extraordinary case is that the Regina case that happened in Brazil, the fact that here we have a possible connection between Coyame that happened in 1974, and then with the Brazilian crash retrieval that happened in 1996, perhaps there might be a connection there. Are we dealing with the same species? If that's possible, Richard, it's been an interesting experience for us. Recently, Noe and I had worked on another book uh, called UFOs over Mexico: Encounters with Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon,
Right.
and primarily that's a book about aviation cases
Hmm.
that involves commercial and military.
Encounters or
And
weather sightings or something. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and that in that book, of course, it just it tells us that what's going on in the skies of Mexico is also happening all over the
Well,
world.
we're kind of running out of time here today, but maybe we come back and talk about that book next time.
Oh,
That's
absolutely,
Yeah, that'd be great.
because what we found was there was other crash retrieval incidents that happened near the Texas-Mexico border. We're just barely touching the top of it.
Well, I mean, when I the my second book, put a list of crashes that, crashes in it, the where they were and also how many bodies were recovered and stuff. But now, I'm hearing there's probably 130 of them that's been recovered over the.
Oh,
And
I
see,
have
the
a
thing is you've got guys like Jake Barber starting to talk about. I don't know if you saw that with Ross Colbert
yes,
the other day, but I mean, they got pictures of them picking them up with helicopters and stuff. So a lot of those guys are kind of coming out in the open and this whole thing's for real. I mean, it's glaringly apparent that there's been a lot of things going on for sure.
yes. Perhaps maybe someday have me come back and I'll have to share with you some of the documents that I've been
Love to.
researching about crash retrievals that have been occurring in the Southwest, especially
Cool,
near the
cool.
border.
Well, I've got a copy of your book up on the screen right now, and a copy of the link where to get it, how you buy it from Amazon. And I really appreciate you coming on here today and talking about this. I was really kind of interested to hear what you had to say about that. I'm sure our listeners will really enjoy it. But thank you again so much for being with us, and we'll schedule another one where we can talk about the other book. That'd be cool.
Yes, perhaps I could bring my other
Oh, by
research
all
friend.
means. Yeah, I was
But
thinking that
knowing
too.
Taurus and I, we could really.
Absolutely. We can absolutely do that. Yeah. So let's talk about that. But anyway, thanks a lot. I'm going to go ahead and uh, say goodbye, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Richard, for the
Thank you.
opportunity.
Thanks a lot. Please check out our website at AEROPS.site. You'll be able to find current posts, new information, and a list of advisory board members. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.